I was just describing like a space for working, and if each of these is a separate person who's working, that we each have our own process for how we manage constraints. So having limited constraints and then taking the constraints away and then limiting again and then having constraints again. So the point where my fingers come together is a set of constraints. So some people's process starts wide open with no constraints and then they add constraints. It's kind of a process back and forth. It's back and forth.
Yeah.
And then eventually in the middle we have like a crossover space and then this becomes the project.
Yeah.
And then we can all work with this set of kind of some open constraints and some really tight constraints. It depends on where all those four people come together and what everybody decides. Like that's kind of a time-based thing. Like usually it's like the show is happening, there's a deadline. Okay, which things are still going to be open-ended and unfinished?
I think it's most exciting for me. It's when there's a kind of fluidity between the context and the thing you're working on, the constraints and the thing itself, and that boundary becomes so permeable.
Good job, Science. You got yourself to a point where you could understand chi. I'm so proud of you.
But that's
a little bit.
Okay, but don't underestimate that as an accomplishment. I think that's
not. It's like they've extended themselves. I mean, I say that like sarcastically a little bit.
And don't assume that you know that you or anybody else knows what that deeper truth is, because they have a perspective coming from that point of ignorance into this point of enlightenment that maybe they have an insight
and
there.
that did a lot of work for them internally. It's like what they did in order to get over ego or whatever they had to do to understand chi is like some really good work that happened within the scientific establishment.
15 seconds.
Okay. What are they?
The way that you frame that question itself even like indicates like the way that like a lot of these inquiries are framed from that perspective. It's like wanting to have a quantified understanding of something and experiencing it are two different things.
No, I'm saying
by virtue of realizing that things are always going to be unstable, you need to provide some constraints to get something done, essentially. But then you need to also acknowledge that when things change, either by adding other people or more people or doing a different task, that you now can open it up towards instability. So you have to kind of, so you have to learn to find stability and to let go and to kind of use the pushes from the instability to find new things.
To trust in stability.
So I think it's partly like when you say like you have to trust people. I would say it's also about maybe understanding what brings people together and be able to kind of rely on that process.
incredible.
You want to hold
being
this
attacked by colored tape and post-its.
I'm being attacked by
tools.
I'm willing to hypothesize that if you took that apart